The Artist Who Drew Light, Act I. Buchenwald Concentration Camp, Germany. Winter 1944. The barracks reek of unwashed bodies, disease, and death. Wooden bunks stacked 3 levels high, each meant for one person but holding 4, sometimes 5. The men lying there are skeletal, their skin stretched tight over bones, their eyes sunken and empty. They've stopped being individuals. Their numbers now, tattooed on their arms, recorded in ledgers, counted during endless roll calls in the freezing dawn. The SS guards don't see humans anymore. They see units of labor, expendable resources, things to be worked until they break and then replaced. But in the corner of Barracks 19, on the lowest bunk near the wall, a man draws. His name is Boris Taslitzky. He's 32 years old, French, a communist arrested in 1941 for resistance activities. He arrived at Buchenwald in 1943, survived selection, survived disease, survived the random brutality that kills men for no reason beyond a guard's bad mood. He's thin like everyone else, weak like everyone else, but his hands still work. His fingers can still grip a stub of charcoal. His eyes can still see. And so he draws. He draws on scraps of paper stolen from the camp administration offices where he works occasionally, sorting documents, a job that keeps him indoors, away from the stone quarry where men die by the dozens every day. He draws on pieces of cardboard pulled from supply boxes. He draws on the blank sides of German forms, requisition slips, anything with a clean surface. The charcoal comes from the barrack stove, stolen bits of burnt wood that leave black marks when pressed against paper. It's crude, imperfect, but it works. What does he draw? Everything. The faces of prisoners, etched with suffering but still recognizably human. The morning roll call, thousands of men standing in perfect rows while SS officers count them like livestock. The dead being carried out on stretchers, bodies so light that one man can carry 2. The public hangings in the square, when prisoners accused of sabotage or escape attempts are executed as examples. He draws the soup line, men shuffling forward with their tin bowls, hoping for something with substance, usually disappointed. He draws the sick bay, where doctors without medicine try to save men who are already dying. He works in secret, absolutely in secret. If the guards discover what he's doing, he'll be killed immediately. Drawing the camp is documentation. Documentation is evidence. Evidence is dangerous to the SS. They don't want the world to know what happens here. They don't want records, photographs, testimony. When prisoners are liberated, if they're liberated, the SS plans to burn everything, destroy all traces, deny it ever happened. Taslitzky knows this. Every line he draws is an act of resistance, a testimony that might outlive him, proof that these atrocities occurred. The other prisoners know what he's doing. Some think he's insane, risking death to draw pictures when he should focus entirely on survival. Others understand. They pose for him when guards aren't watching, hold still for precious seconds while he captures their faces. They protect him, watch for guards, warn him when danger approaches. An informal network develops, prisoners working together to preserve his artwork, to keep him alive, to ensure his testimony survives. Taslitzky was an artist before the war. He studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, showed promise, exhibited in small galleries. He was building a career, making a name for himself in the Parisian art world. Then the war came. Then the occupation. Then the arrest. His previous life feels impossibly distant now, a dream from another universe. But his training serves him here. He can capture a face in minutes, a scene in an hour. His memory for detail is precise, photographic. When he draws the camp, he draws it accurately, obsessively accurately, because accuracy is truth and truth is what matters. December 1944. The camp is overcrowded beyond belief. Prisoners arrive daily from other camps being evacuated as Soviet forces advance from the east. Buchenwald was designed to hold perhaps 10,000. It now contains over 60,000. The conditions deteriorate catastrophically. Food rations shrink further. Disease spreads unchecked. Typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis, they sweep through the barracks, killing hundreds weekly. The crematorium runs constantly, smoke rising day and night, the smell of burning flesh permeating everything. Taslitzky witnesses a scene that will haunt him forever, a scene he must draw even though drawing it tears something inside him. A transport arrives from Auschwitz. The prisoners stagger off the train cars, barely alive. They've traveled for days in unheated cattle cars during winter, packed so tightly they couldn't sit down. Many died during transport, froze to death standing up, their corpses held upright by the press of living bodies around them. When the doors open, the dead fall out first, frozen solid, landing with sickening thuds on the platform. The survivors are in worse condition than any prisoners Taslitzky has seen, and he's seen thousands in various stages of deterioration. These men from Auschwitz are living skeletons, their skin gray, their eyes blank. They move like automatons, shuffling forward mechanically, no longer capable of thought or emotion. They've been through something beyond Buchenwald's horror, something that destroyed whatever humanity remained after imprisonment. They've seen the gas chambers, the crematoriums, the selection ramps. They're the ones who survived because they could still work, but survival cost them something irreplaceable. Taslitzky watches them being processed, stripped, deloused, assigned to barracks. He memorizes every detail. That night, by the light of a single candle, hidden behind a blanket hung for privacy, he draws what he saw. The train platform. The corpses. The skeletal survivors. The indifferent SS guards smoking cigarettes while men die at their feet. He draws until his hands cramp, until the candle burns down, until exhaustion forces him to stop. Then he hides the drawing inside his mattress, wrapped in cloth, protected as much as possible from the dampness and vermin. He now has over 50 drawings hidden throughout the barracks. Some inside mattresses. Some under floorboards. Some behind loose bricks in the wall. He's distributed them deliberately, ensuring that if one cache is discovered, the others might survive. Other prisoners help, hide drawings in their own bunks, memorize locations. If Taslitzky dies, if he's shot or beaten or succumbs to disease, someone else must know where the drawings are, must be able to recover them, must be able to show the world what happened here. January 1945. The Allied bombing campaign intensifies. American bombers fly over regularly, targeting German factories, railways, cities. Buchenwald is near Weimar, an industrial area, so the bombers pass overhead frequently. The prisoners watch the formations, the silver aircraft glinting in sunlight, the contrail stretching across the sky. They pray for bombs to fall on the camp, to destroy it, to kill guards and prisoners alike if necessary. Death from above would be mercy compared to slow starvation and disease. But the bombs fall elsewhere. The camp remains untouched. The guards grow more nervous, more brutal. They know Germany is losing. They know Soviet forces are advancing from the east, American forces from the west. They know liberation is coming eventually. But they don't stop the killing. If anything, they accelerate it. Prisoners are shot for minor infractions, for looking at a guard wrong, for stumbling during roll call. The hangings increase in frequency. The crematorium runs constantly. The SS seems determined to murder as many as possible before the end comes. Taslitzky draws frantically. He feels time running out. Liberation is coming, but will he survive until it arrives? Will his drawing survive? Every day might be his last. Every drawing might be the final testimony. He works faster, abandons some artistic refinement for speed and documentation. What matters now is capturing as much as possible, recording everything, ensuring that if he dies, his work remains. He draws the children. Yes, there are children in Buchenwald, brought from other camps, orphaned, alone. They're kept in a separate barracks, given slightly better rations, protected by older prisoners who form an informal committee to care for them. But they're still children in a death camp, watching executions, witnessing horrors no child should see. Taslitzky draws their faces, their eyes far too old for their years, innocents murdered by exposure to systematic evil. He draws the political prisoners, the communists, socialists, and resistance fighters who form the camp's underground organization. They're planning something, he knows, though he's not part of the inner circle. They're preparing for a moment when the guards flee, when chaos erupts, when the prisoners might seize control rather than be massacred during evacuation. Taslitzky isn't a fighter. His contribution is different. His weapon is charcoal and paper. His battlefield is memory. His victory will come if his drawings survive to testify. February 1945. A prisoner named Stefan approaches Taslitzky during the evening meal distribution. Stefan is Polish, a resistance fighter, part of the underground organization. He's thin but strong, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He speaks quietly, urgently. The organization knows about the drawings. They want to help preserve them. They have contacts outside the camp, civilians who work in nearby factories, Germans who oppose the Nazis, people who might hide the artwork until liberation. Would Taslitzky trust them with some drawings? Would he risk smuggling them out of the camp? Taslitzky struggles with the decision. Keeping the drawings inside the camp means they might be discovered and destroyed during a search. But smuggling them out means trusting people he's never met, risking that the drawings will be lost or confiscated. He lies awake that night, considering the options, weighing risks. Finally, he decides. Yes. He'll send some drawings out. Not all, but enough to ensure that even if the camp cache is destroyed, testimony survives. Over the following weeks, a careful operation unfolds. Certain prisoners work outside the camp on labor details, supervised but with occasional opportunities. During these details, drawings wrapped in oilcloth are passed to civilian workers, German anti-fascists who risk their lives to preserve evidence. The civilians hide the drawings in their homes, in attics, in cellars, waiting for liberation. It's incredibly dangerous. If caught, the civilians face arrest, torture, execution. But they do it anyway. Because they know the truth must survive. Because they're ashamed of what their country has become. Because they're human beings who refuse to be complicit in genocide. March 1945. The camp descends into chaos. Food supplies collapse entirely. The SS stops pretending to maintain order. Guards steal rations meant for prisoners. Roll calls become irregular. The sick bay overflows with dying men. Bodies pile up faster than the crematorium can process them. The smell is overwhelming, inescapable, the stench of death permeating everything. Taslitzky is sick now, feverish, weak from dysentery. He can barely stand during roll call, has to be supported by other prisoners. But he continues drawing. Lying on his bunk, too weak to sit up, he draws the ceiling above him, the cramped space, the bodies of dead men who weren't removed yet. He draws with trembling hands, his vision blurred by fever, but he draws. Because stopping means surrendering. And he refuses to surrender. The underground organization meets secretly, finalizing plans for resistance if the SS attempts to evacuate or liquidate the camp. They've hidden weapons, crude implements, stolen tools, anything that might serve as a weapon. They've identified key positions, guard towers, armories, administration buildings. They're preparing for a moment that may never come, but they prepare anyway. Because dying while fighting is preferable to dying passively. Because they're done being victims. Taslitzky overhears conversations. The war is ending. Hitler is trapped in Berlin. Soviet forces are 50 miles away. American forces are closer, maybe 30 miles. Liberation is measured in days now, not weeks. But the prisoners fear the SS will kill them all before liberators arrive, eliminate evidence, murder witnesses. Every day that passes without massacre is a gift, a reprieve, a miracle. April 1945. The guards are abandoning the camp. Not officially, but individually, slipping away during night shifts, discarding uniforms, fleeing west toward American lines. They know Soviet forces show no mercy to SS personnel. They know the Americans might be more lenient. They're rats fleeing a sinking ship, cowards who tortured and murdered when they held power but now run in terror. The senior SS officers call a meeting, order a final roll call. 60,000 prisoners assemble in the square, standing for hours, waiting for orders that never come. The officers argue among themselves. Evacuate? Liquidate? Surrender? They can't decide. The prisoners watch, barely breathing, knowing their fate hangs on this argument. Finally, the officers disperse without giving orders. Chaos, bureaucratic paralysis, the collapse of the system that ran with such mechanical efficiency. Taslitzky watches from his barracks window, too weak to attend roll call, his comrades covering for him during count. He sees the confusion, the disorganization, the fear on guards' faces. He allows himself to hope, just slightly, carefully, because hope in this place is dangerous. But he hopes anyway. He might survive. His drawings might survive. The testimony might reach the world. April 11, 1945. Early morning. The underground organization receives information from their civilian contacts. American forces are 5 miles away, approaching rapidly. The senior SS officers have fled during the night. Only a skeleton crew of guards remains, and they're preparing to leave. The moment has arrived. The organization acts. They seize the guard towers, the gates, the administration buildings. The remaining guards flee without fighting, dropping weapons, running into the forests. Within hours, the prisoners control the camp. They raise a white flag. They post lookouts. They wait for the Americans to arrive. Taslitzky, feverish and weak, crawls from his bunk. Other prisoners help him to the window. He sees the flag, sees prisoners moving freely in the square, sees the guard towers empty. It's over. The nightmare is ending. He weeps, unable to stop, tears streaming down his gaunt face. Men around him weep too, hardened prisoners who haven't cried in years, they weep together, releasing 3 years of horror, fear, and despair. The American forces arrive at 3 in the afternoon. The Third Army, commanded by General Patton, rolling through the gates in tanks and trucks, soldiers jumping down, weapons ready, expecting resistance. Instead, they find skeletal prisoners cheering weakly, waving makeshift flags, embracing their liberators with arms too weak to hold tightly. The soldiers are shocked, speechless. They've been fighting across Europe for months, seen combat, seen death, but nothing prepared them for this. The living skeletons. The piles of corpses. The crematorium still smoking. The smell. Dear God, the smell. Hardened combat veterans vomit at the sight. Officers send urgent requests for medical support, supplies, everything. Photographers document everything, cameras clicking constantly, capturing evidence that will be shown at war crimes trials. Taslitzky is carried to the camp hospital, now being set up properly by American medics. He's delirious with fever, barely conscious. But before they take him, he grabs a medic's arm, pulls him close, speaks urgently in broken English mixed with French. The drawings. Under the floorboards. In the mattresses. Behind the walls. They must be preserved. They must be found. The medic doesn't fully understand but nods, promises to tell someone. The drawings are recovered over the following days. American intelligence officers, working with camp survivors, locate the hidden caches. They find charcoal sketches wrapped in cloth, protected as much as possible from dampness and decay. Some are damaged, some are perfectly preserved. Over 70 drawings in total, a comprehensive visual record of life and death in Buchenwald, drawn by a prisoner who risked everything to document the truth, testimony captured in lines of stolen charcoal on scraps of paper, proof that will outlive the camp, outlive the Reich, outlive everyone who tried to hide these crimes from history. The Artist Who Drew Light, Act 2. April 1945. Buchenwald, now liberated. The American medics establish field hospitals in the former SS barracks, the cleanest buildings in the camp, the ones with heat and running water that prisoners never accessed. Boris Taslitzky lies in a cot, an actual cot with clean sheets, something he hasn't experienced in 3 years. For fluids drip into his arm, antibiotics fighting the infections ravaging his body. He weighs 78 pounds. Before the war, he weighed 160. He's lost more than half his body mass, his organs failing, his immune system destroyed by prolonged starvation and disease. The American doctor, Captain Morrison, examines him daily. Morrison is young, maybe 28, from somewhere in the Midwest, trained to treat combat wounds and battlefield trauma. But nothing in medical school prepared him for this, for treating mass starvation, for patients whose bodies have consumed themselves to survive. He does what he can, for nutrition, vitamins, antibiotics for the infections, but mostly he just tries to keep Taslitzky alive long enough for his body to remember how to function. Morrison speaks some French, learned from a girlfriend back in college. He sits beside Taslitzky's cot during quiet moments, asks about the drawings. Taslitzky, barely conscious, describes them in fragments. The roll calls. The executions. The transports. The children. Morrison listens, takes notes, promises the drawings will be preserved. He doesn't tell Taslitzky that he's already seen them, that they've been collected by military intelligence, that they're being photographed and catalogued as evidence for war crimes tribunals. He doesn't tell Taslitzky because he's not sure the artist will survive to learn this himself. But Taslitzky does survive. His body is young enough, resilient enough, to slowly recover. The fever breaks after 5 days. His appetite returns gradually, though he can only eat tiny portions without vomiting. His strength rebuilds incrementally, measured in small victories. Sitting up without assistance. Standing for 30 seconds. Walking 3 steps to the latrine. Each milestone is celebrated by the medical staff, proof that human bodies can recover even from this extreme degradation. By early May, Taslitzky is well enough to move around the hospital ward. He's still skeletal, still weak, but conscious and coherent. Other survivors visit him, men he knew from the barracks, resistance fighters from the underground organization. They bring news. Germany has surrendered. Hitler is dead, suicide in his bunker. The war in Europe is over. The nightmare has ended. But ending the nightmare doesn't erase it. Taslitzky struggles with what comes next. He's alive, he survived, but what does survival mean? What does he do now? Return to France? Resume his art career as if nothing happened? Pretend the last 3 years were an interruption, a pause, something to be moved past? The idea is absurd. He's not the same person who entered Buchenwald. That person died somewhere in the endless roll calls, the starvation, the daily confrontation with systematic murder. The person who survived is someone else entirely, shaped by horror, defined by testimony, unable to return to normalcy. The military intelligence officers arrive in mid-May. 2 lieutenants, 1 American, 1 British, both assigned to document Nazi atrocities for the upcoming trials. They bring Taslitzky's drawings, now photographed and catalogued, stored in protective folders. They spread them across a table in the hospital dayroom, ask him to identify each one, provide dates if possible, explain the context. They're building evidence, constructing the case against camp commandants, guards, administrators. Taslitzky examines his own work, seeing it properly for the first time. In the camp, he drew by candlelight or daylight filtered through filthy windows, always rushed, always fearful of discovery. Now he sees the drawings in good light, laid out in sequence. They're crude technically, the charcoal medium limiting detail, the poor materials restricting refinement. But they're powerful. They capture something essential, something true about the camp experience. The hollow eyes. The skeletal bodies. The casual brutality. The industrial efficiency of murder. He identifies each drawing, provides details the officers record meticulously. This one shows the morning roll call on December 15, 1944, when 3 men collapsed and died during the count, temperatures 20 degrees below zero, prisoners standing in thin uniforms for 4 hours. This one shows the public hanging on January 8, 1945, 2 Polish prisoners accused of sabotaging factory machinery, executed as examples, their bodies left hanging for 3 days. This one shows the children's barracks, orphans ranging from 8 to 14 years old, their faces ancient with trauma. The officers ask if he's willing to testify at trials. Yes, absolutely yes. He'll testify, he'll explain the drawings, he'll describe what he witnessed. He'll look camp commandants in the eye and detail their crimes. He'll ensure they face justice, that they're held accountable, that the world knows what they did. The officers thank him, promise he'll be contacted when trials are scheduled, gather the drawings carefully and leave. June 1945. Taslitzky is strong enough to be transferred to a displaced persons camp in France, a facility near Paris processing returning deportees. The journey takes 3 days by truck and train, moving through a Germany that's completely destroyed, cities reduced to rubble, infrastructure collapsed, millions of refugees clogging roads heading nowhere because home no longer exists. The scale of destruction is overwhelming, biblical, entire nations reduced to ash and ruins. The displaced persons camp is chaotic, thousands of survivors from various camps trying to reconnect with families, locate missing relatives, determine who survived and who didn't. Red Cross workers help with searches, checking lists, sending telegrams, reuniting families when possible. More often, they deliver devastating news. Your wife died in Auschwitz. Your children were killed during liquidation. Your parents perished in the transport. The camp echoes with grief, with wailing, with the sounds of people learning their worst fears are confirmed. Taslitzky searches for his own family. His parents, his sister, his brother. He files requests, checks lists, waits for information. The responses come gradually over weeks. His parents were deported from Paris in 1942, sent to Drancy then Auschwitz, never seen again. His sister survived, she's in Paris, she escaped arrest by hiding with a Christian family. His brother died in the resistance, killed during a sabotage operation in 1943. 3 survived, 2 died. Better than many families' accounting, worse than any outcome should be. His sister, Marie, visits him in July. She's 28 now, thin but healthy, working as a secretary in Paris. They embrace carefully, both fragile in different ways. She tells him about the occupation years, about living in constant fear, about the Christian family who risked execution to hide her. She asks about Buchenwald but he can't talk about it yet, can't articulate the experience, can only shake his head and change the subject. She understands, doesn't push, just holds his hand and promises they'll rebuild together. But rebuilding proves difficult. Taslitzky returns to Paris in August, moves into a small apartment Marie found for him. The city is celebrating liberation, cafes full, people dancing in the streets, determined to forget the war years and embrace normalcy. But Taslitzky can't celebrate. He walks through familiar streets feeling like a ghost, disconnected from the joy around him. People complain about minor inconveniences, about rationing, about shortages. He wants to scream at them. You don't know what suffering is. You don't know what it means to watch men die from starvation. You don't understand anything. He tries to paint, sets up an easel in his apartment, faces a blank canvas. Nothing comes. His hands won't cooperate. The images in his mind are all from Buchenwald, the skeletal prisoners, the corpses, the children's faces. He can't paint flowers or landscapes or abstract compositions. Those subjects feel trivial, meaningless, irrelevant after what he witnessed. But he can't paint the camp either, can't transfer those charcoal sketches to proper paintings, can't face the memories that fully engaging with the subject would require. September 1945. Taslitzky receives notice that he's scheduled to testify at the Nuremberg Trials in October. The International Military Tribunal is preparing cases against major Nazi war criminals, building prosecutions based on documentary evidence and survivor testimony. His drawings have been selected as evidence, visual documentation of camp conditions. He's one of dozens of survivors who will testify, putting human faces on the statistics, the 6 million murdered Jews, the millions of other victims. He travels to Nuremberg in October, arriving in a city that's been bombed to rubble, the medieval buildings destroyed, the castle damaged, only the courthouse remaining relatively intact. The tribunal assembles in the Palace of Justice, a massive courtroom filled with prosecutors, defense attorneys, judges from 4 nations, and the defendants themselves, 21 high-ranking Nazis sitting in 2 rows, wearing civilian clothes, looking diminished and ordinary without their uniforms and power. Taslitzky testifies on October 18, 1945. He's sworn in, takes his seat in the witness box, faces the courtroom. The prosecutor is American, a skilled lawyer who guides him through testimony methodically. Please state your name and nationality. Boris Taslitzky, French citizen. Please describe your arrest and deportation. Arrested in 1941 for resistance activities, held in French prisons, transferred to German custody, sent to Buchenwald in 1943. The prosecutor displays the drawings, projected on screens visible to the entire courtroom. This is your work? Yes. Can you describe what this drawing depicts? That's the morning roll call, prisoners standing in formation, guards counting them, men collapsing from exhaustion and cold. And this one? That's the crematorium, bodies being loaded, the smoke that rose constantly. And this? The children's barracks, orphans whose parents were murdered, children who witnessed atrocities no child should see. He testifies for 3 hours, his voice steady, his descriptions precise. He doesn't cry, doesn't break down, maintains composure through detailed descriptions of horror. The courtroom is silent, everyone transfixed by his testimony, by the drawings, by the calm recitation of systematic murder. The defendants watch impassively, showing no emotion, no remorse, no acknowledgement of responsibility. They sit like bored bureaucrats attending a tedious meeting, as if testimony about atrocities they orchestrated is merely inconvenient paperwork. When prosecution finishes, the defense attorneys cross-examine. They're German lawyers, skilled professionals trying to create doubt, to minimize, to suggest conditions weren't as bad as claimed. Isn't it possible you're exaggerating? No, impossible, everything I drew I witnessed directly. Couldn't these drawings be propaganda, created after liberation to demonize Germany? No, they were drawn in the camp under threat of death if discovered, other prisoners can verify this. Might you be mistaken about dates or specific incidents? No, I recorded everything precisely, these events are burned into my memory permanently. The cross-examination fails to shake his testimony. The evidence is too strong, the drawings too detailed, his memory too precise. The defense attorneys eventually give up, sit down, concede this witness is unshakable. The prosecutor thanks Taslitzky, the judges excuse him, he's dismissed. He leaves the courtroom exhausted, drained, feeling like he's been gutted and reassembled incorrectly. Outside the courthouse, other survivors wait, witnesses who testified earlier or will testify later. They embrace him, thank him for his testimony, for the drawings, for creating a record that supports their own accounts. Many survivors struggle to be believed, their testimonies dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. But Taslitzky's drawings provide corroboration, visual evidence that validates verbal testimony, proof that makes denial impossible. November 1945. Taslitzky returns to Paris. He tries again to paint, forces himself to engage with his art. This time, something breaks loose. He begins a series of large paintings based on the camp drawings, translating the crude charcoal sketches into full-scale oil paintings. The work is grueling, emotionally devastating, each painting requiring him to relive specific memories, to reconstruct scenes from hell in vivid color and detail. He paints the roll call, hundreds of skeletal figures standing in rows, guards with rifles, the gray dawn light, the expressions of blank exhaustion on prisoners' faces. He paints the liberation, American soldiers entering the camp, prisoners embracing their liberators, the contrast between healthy soldiers and skeletal prisoners stark and disturbing. He paints the children, a group portrait of the young survivors, their eyes far too old, their bodies too thin, innocents murdered by exposure to evil. The paintings are difficult to look at. Gallery owners reject them, calling them too disturbing, too depressing, uncommercial. Post-war Paris wants lightness, joy, celebration. The art world wants abstract expressionism, color-field paintings, anything that moves away from war and suffering. Nobody wants to hang paintings of concentration camp victims in their living rooms. Nobody wants to be reminded of the horror that just ended. But Taslitzky persists. He's not painting for commercial success. He's painting to preserve memory, to ensure the camps aren't forgotten, to create a visual record that will outlast survivor testimony. Eventually, everyone who witnessed the camps will die. But paintings can survive centuries. His work can testify long after his voice is silent. December 1945. A small gallery in the Marais district agrees to show his work. The opening is sparsely attended, a few dozen people, mostly other survivors, some journalists, a handful of artists. The general public stays away, unwilling to confront uncomfortable truths. But the critics who do attend are moved, writing powerful reviews that acknowledge the painting's importance even while admitting they're difficult to experience. One review describes standing before the liberation painting, weeping openly in the gallery, unable to look away despite wanting to, feeling compelled to witness what Taslitzky witnessed, to honor the dead by acknowledging their suffering. Another review calls the work essential historical documentation, art in service of truth, a permanent indictment of the Nazi regime preserved in oil and canvas. The exhibition runs for 6 weeks. Attendance is modest but steady, a slow stream of visitors who come to witness, to learn, to remember. Some are survivors themselves, seeking validation, wanting to see their experience reflected in art. Others are French citizens wrestling with guilt, with the knowledge that their government collaborated, that their neighbors were deported, that they didn't do enough to resist. The paintings force confrontation with complicity, with the question of what each person did during the occupation, whether they resisted or collaborated or simply survived. Taslitzky attends the gallery most days, sitting quietly in the corner, available if visitors want to talk but not forcing conversation. Some approach him, ask questions, express gratitude for his testimony. Others maintain distance, too overwhelmed by the paintings to engage with their creator. He understands both reactions, respects both responses. The work exists now independent of him, speaking its own truth, bearing witness on behalf of those who can't witness anymore. January 1946. Life settles into a new routine. Taslitzky continues painting, working on the camp series, expanding it to include more scenes, more faces, more testimony. He receives modest financial support from Jewish relief organizations, grants to help survivors rebuild their lives. It's not much, barely enough for rent and materials, but sufficient. He lives simply, needs little, finds purpose in the work itself rather than in financial reward. He reconnects with other survivors, forming friendships with people who understand what civilian friends cannot. They meet in cafes, share meals, talk about camp experiences that they can't discuss with anyone else. They speak a language of shared trauma, references to specific events, dark humor about death and suffering that would shock outsiders but among themselves is cathartic, necessary, healing. One friend, David, was in Auschwitz. They compare experiences, find similarities and differences. Buchenwald was brutal but not systematically exterminatory like Auschwitz. Buchenwald killed through labor, disease, random violence. Auschwitz killed through industrial process, gas chambers, immediate selection, the murder of millions. David describes watching families separated on the selection ramp, children torn from mothers, elderly sent directly to gas chambers. Taslitzky describes the stone quarry, watching men work to death carrying impossibly heavy stones up steep stairs. The conversations are therapeutic, allowing both men to externalize trauma, to share the burden of memory. But they're also exhausting, each discussion excavating painful details, reopening wounds that never fully healed. They agree to meet weekly but limit discussions to 2 hours, preserving their mental health, preventing complete immersion in darkness. February 1946. Taslitzky receives a letter from the Nuremberg Tribunal. Several defendants have been convicted, sentenced to death or lengthy imprisonment. The tribunal credits survivor testimony, including his, as crucial evidence. The drawings particularly impressed the judges, providing visual documentation that made denial impossible. The letter thanks him for his contribution to justice, acknowledges the personal cost of testimony, expresses hope that the tribunal's work brings some measure of peace to survivors. Taslitzky reads the letter multiple times. Justice. Peace. The words feel inadequate. The camp commandants will be executed or imprisoned, yes. But does that constitute justice? Can justice exist for crimes of this magnitude? 6 million Jews murdered, millions of others killed, entire communities destroyed. No punishment can balance that scale, no sentence can restore what was lost. The executions will be symbolic, performative, a gesture toward accountability that doesn't actually account for the enormity of the crimes. But perhaps symbols matter. Perhaps gestures are necessary even when inadequate. Perhaps holding perpetrators accountable, however symbolically, is better than allowing them to escape consequence. He decides to accept this, to find meaning in the tribunal's work even while recognizing its limitations. The alternative is nihilism, is believing that nothing matters, that evil went unpunished, that the deaths were meaningless. He refuses that conclusion. The deaths must mean something. The testimony must matter. The drawings must bear witness effectively. March 1946. Taslitzky begins receiving invitations to speak at schools, to give lectures about his experience, to educate young people who didn't live through the occupation. He's reluctant initially, uncomfortable with public speaking, unsure whether he can discuss the camps without breaking down. But he accepts one invitation, speaks at a Paris lycée to a class of 17-year-olds. He brings his drawings, passes them around, lets the students examine them closely. He describes his arrest, his deportation, his 3 years in Buchenwald. He explains why he drew, why documentation mattered, why creating a visual record was worth risking his life. The students listen silently, completely focused, some crying openly. After the lecture, they ask questions for an hour. How did you survive? Why did Nazis do this? Could it happen again? He answers honestly. I survived partially through luck, partially through the help of other prisoners, partially through having a purpose in drawing. Nazis did this because they believed in racial superiority, because they dehumanized victims, because systematic murder became bureaucratic routine. Could it happen again? Yes, absolutely yes, if people forget, if hatred is allowed to flourish, if populations become indifferent to suffering. The lecture exhausts him but also energizes him. These young people need to know this history, need to understand what happened, need to be educated so they resist fascism in the future. He accepts more invitations, begins speaking regularly, develops a lecture that combines testimony with art analysis, using his drawings to teach history through visual evidence. April 1946. 1 year since liberation. Taslitzky marks the anniversary quietly, visits a synagogue, says Kaddish for his parents, for the prisoners who died, for everyone murdered. He's not particularly religious, never was, but the ritual provides structure for grief, a framework for remembering. The synagogue is full of survivors, all there for the same reason, all marking this anniversary, all saying prayers for the dead. After the service, survivors gather outside, talking, sharing news, checking on each other. It's a community now, bound by shared trauma, connected by experiences that outsiders can't fully understand. They organize regular meetings, create mutual support networks, help each other navigate post-war challenges. Finding housing, securing employment, dealing with bureaucracy, coping with trauma. They support each other practically and emotionally, a family forged in hell, determined to survive not just physically but psychologically. Taslitzky walks home through Paris, watching the city rebuild, construction everywhere, new buildings rising from bomb-damaged lots. Physical reconstruction happens quickly. Psychological reconstruction takes longer. How long before survivors feel normal? How long before nightmares stop? How long before the smell of smoke doesn't trigger panic? He doesn't know. Maybe never. Maybe the camps marked them permanently, branded them with trauma that won't fade. Maybe survival means learning to live with damage, to function despite brokenness, to build lives on foundations that cracked but didn't completely shatter. He returns to his apartment, to his easel, to the painting in progress. A new work, depicting the moment of liberation, prisoners emerging from barracks into sunlight, American soldiers entering the camp, the flag of freedom replacing the swastika. It's hopeful in a way his other paintings aren't, suggesting redemption, survival, the triumph of humanity over evil. He's not sure he believes that triumph completely. But he paints it anyway. Because hope matters. Because suggesting possibility matters. Because testifying to liberation is as important as testifying to imprisonment. Both are true. Both must be recorded. Both are part of the complete story that his art must tell. The Artist Who Drew Light, Act 3. May 1946. Paris rebuilds itself stone by stone, but Boris Taslitzky remains suspended between two worlds. The city around him celebrates liberation, embraces the future, determined to forget the occupation years. But he can't forget. His apartment becomes a studio dedicated entirely to memory, walls covered with sketches, paintings in various stages of completion, all depicting the camps, the prisoners, the systematic machinery of death. He works obsessively, driven by a mission he can't abandon. The dead demand testimony. The survivors need validation. History requires documentation. His exhibition travels to other cities. Brussels, Amsterdam, London. Each opening brings more survivors, more witnesses, more people seeking confirmation that what they experienced was real, was documented, was acknowledged. Gallery owners remain uncomfortable with the subject matter, but critical acclaim forces them to recognize the work's importance. These aren't just paintings. They're historical documents, visual testimony, proof that will outlast memory. In London, a British officer who liberated Buchenwald attends the exhibition. Captain Williams, now returned to civilian life, working as a schoolteacher. He stands before the liberation painting for 20 minutes, tears streaming down his face. Afterward, he approaches Taslitzky, shakes his hand, thanks him. Williams says he has nightmares about what he saw that April day, the skeletal prisoners, the corpses, the smell. The paintings validate his memory, prove he didn't imagine the horror, confirm that what he witnessed actually happened. They talk for an hour, sharing perspectives from opposite sides of liberation, the prisoner and the liberator, both traumatized, both struggling to reconcile what they experienced with the normal world they inhabit now. September 1946. Taslitzky receives a commission from the French government. They want a memorial painting for the deportation museum being planned in Paris. Something large, monumental, commemorating French citizens murdered in Nazi camps. He accepts, begins work on his most ambitious piece, a massive canvas depicting a transport train, prisoners being loaded into cattle cars, families torn apart, children crying, the moment when ordinary life ended and hell began. The painting takes 6 months. He works 12-hour days, building the composition layer by layer, faces emerging from darkness, expressions capturing the precise moment when people realized they were doomed. Some faces show terror. Others show resignation. Some show defiant rage. He paints them all, honoring individual experiences, refusing to homogenize suffering into a single narrative. March 1947. The memorial painting is unveiled at a ceremony attended by government officials, survivors, families of the murdered. The Minister of Culture gives a speech about remembrance, about France's obligation to honor victims, about ensuring such atrocities never recur. The words ring hollow to Taslitzky. Where were these officials during the occupation? Where was this outrage when French police rounded up Jews for deportation? Where was this commitment to honor when collaborators handed over citizens to die? But he stays silent during the ceremony, accepts the recognition, shakes hands with politicians who congratulate him. Because the painting matters more than his personal bitterness. The painting will hang in a museum, will be seen by future generations, will testify long after politicians and survivors are dust. That's what matters. Not the ceremony. Not the speeches. Just the permanent record, the visual testimony that won't fade. The years pass. Taslitzky continues painting, teaching, testifying at various war crimes trials. His work gains recognition, wins awards, gets acquired by major museums. But commercial success feels irrelevant. He's not painting for galleries or collectors. He's painting for history, for memory, for the obligation he accepted in Buchenwald when he first picked up that charcoal stub and decided to document the undocumentable. He marries in 1950, a woman named Helene who works at the Deportation Museum, who understands his mission, who accepts that part of him will always remain in the camps. They have no children. Taslitzky can't imagine bringing children into a world capable of Buchenwald, can't risk loving something that could be torn away. Helene understands, doesn't push, builds a life with him accepting these limitations. The 1950s bring political complications. Taslitzky remains committed to communism, believing the Soviet Union represents the best hope for preventing fascism's return. He joins the French Communist Party, creates propaganda posters, participates in worker movements. Some criticize him for supporting Stalin's regime, point out Soviet atrocities, question how a concentration camp survivor can defend another totalitarian system. He struggles with these contradictions, sees the parallels but refuses to abandon the ideology that sustained him through imprisonment. The cognitive dissonance tears at him but he maintains his belief stubbornly, desperately, needing to believe that his suffering meant something, that communism remains the path forward. The 1960s bring change. New generations emerge, young people who didn't experience the war, who view it as ancient history, who want to move forward rather than dwell on the past. Taslitzky becomes a bridge, an educator, a living connection to events that risk being forgotten. He speaks at universities, at memorial services, at conferences. He shows his drawings, tells his story, answers the same questions repeatedly. How did you survive? Why did you draw? What do you want people to learn? His answers evolve over time but the core remains constant. I survived through luck and the help of others. I drew to create testimony, to ensure the camps couldn't be denied or forgotten. I want people to learn that ordinary humans are capable of extraordinary evil when they dehumanize others, when they follow orders without questioning, when they prioritize obedience over conscience. The 1970s bring a resurgence of interest in Holocaust history. Scholars publish studies, filmmakers create documentaries, survivors write memoirs. Taslitzky's drawings are reproduced in textbooks, included in exhibitions worldwide, recognized as crucial primary sources. Museums request loans, researchers request interviews, filmmakers request access. He cooperates with everyone, understanding that widespread distribution serves the mission better than protective isolation. In 1975, a major retrospective of his work opens at the Musée d'Art Moderne in Paris. The exhibition includes the original Buchenwald drawings, the large memorial paintings, later works addressing war and injustice. Critics praise the exhibition as essential, calling Taslitzky one of the great witnesses of the 20th century, an artist who used his talent not for beauty but for truth, not for pleasure but for testimony. The opening night is crowded, hundreds attending, survivors now elderly, their children and grandchildren learning family history through art. Taslitzky, 73 years old, white-haired and frail, moves through the crowd accepting congratulations, embracing old friends, many of whom he hasn't seen in decades. They're the remaining survivors, the ones who made it through the camps and survived the decades after, who built lives despite trauma, who raised families despite nightmares. They gather in a quiet corner, these old men who were young prisoners together, and they remember. They speak names of the dead, the ones who didn't make it to liberation, the ones who died in the months after from disease or despair. They're a dying generation, the last witnesses, knowing their memories will die with them. But Taslitzky's drawings will remain. The paintings will remain. The testimony will continue beyond their lifetimes. Helene dies in 1978. Cancer, swift and brutal. Taslitzky is devastated, loses the partner who supported him for 28 years, who understood his mission, who shared his commitment to memory. He retreats into work, painting furiously, driven by renewed urgency. He's 76, his own time limited, so much still undocumented, so many stories untold. The 1980s bring his final major project. A series of portraits, 40 paintings, each depicting a specific prisoner he knew in Buchenwald. Men whose faces he memorized, whose stories he carries, whose deaths he witnessed. He paints them from memory, decades after seeing them last, but the faces remain vivid, precise, burned into his brain permanently. Each portrait is accompanied by a brief biography, names, dates, how they died. It's his final testimony, his last gift to the dead, ensuring they're remembered individually rather than lost in statistical masses. The portrait series is exhibited in 1984 at the Memorial de la Shoah in Paris. The opening coincides with the 40th anniversary of D-Day, bringing renewed attention to World War II history. Younger generations attend, children and grandchildren of survivors, people born decades after liberation who come seeking connection to family history, to understand what their parents and grandparents endured. Taslitzky attends despite failing health. He's 82, his body worn down by age and the lasting effects of camp starvation. But he stands in the gallery, leans on a cane, greets visitors, tells stories about the men in the portraits. This one was a Polish teacher who taught other prisoners mathematics secretly. This one was a German communist who organized resistance. This one was a French student, only 19 when he died from typhus. Each face, each story, each life honored through art. A journalist asks him the inevitable question. After 4 decades, after hundreds of paintings and drawings, thousands of hours testifying and teaching, does he feel he's accomplished his mission? Has he successfully preserved memory? Taslitzky considers carefully before answering. He's accomplished something, yes. The drawings survived. The testimony exists. Museums hold his work. Textbooks reproduce his images. Future generations will have access to visual documentation of the camps. But accomplished completely? No. Because memory fades. Because new generations must constantly be educated. Because the fight against forgetting never ends. His work provided tools for remembrance, but others must use those tools. Memory is active, not passive. It requires constant effort, constant vigilance, constant commitment. The journalist asks one more question. If he could speak to his younger self, to the terrified prisoner hiding drawings under floorboards in 1944, what would he say? Taslitzky's eyes fill with tears. He would tell that young man, that starving prisoner risking death to draw, that it matters. That the drawings will survive. That they'll be seen by millions. That they'll help convict war criminals. That they'll educate generations. That his sacrifice, his courage, his commitment to testimony will produce results beyond anything he imagines possible in those dark Baroque nights. He would tell him to keep drawing. To not give up. To trust that bearing witness matters even when survival seems impossible. Boris Taslitzky dies in 2005, aged 93. He lived 60 years after liberation, decades devoted entirely to memory, to testimony, to ensuring the dead weren't forgotten. His funeral is attended by hundreds, survivors and their descendants, students and scholars, artists and educators. The eulogies emphasize his courage, his commitment, his refusal to let silence bury truth. His drawings and paintings are held in museums across Europe, permanent collections ensuring his testimony continues indefinitely. The original Buchenwald sketches, those charcoal drawings created in secret under threat of death, they're preserved in climate-controlled storage, brought out for exhibitions, handled with archival gloves, treated as sacred objects because that's what they are. They're more than art. They're evidence. They're testimony. They're voices of the dead speaking through marks on paper, witnesses who won't be silenced. Taslitzky's legacy extends beyond his artwork. He inspired other survivor artists, validated the use of art as testimony, proved that creative documentation serves history as effectively as written records. His life demonstrated that bearing witness is an active choice, a deliberate commitment, a mission that requires sacrificing comfort, security, and normalcy in service of truth. Students still study his work, analyzing technique and content, learning how art can document history, how images can testify as powerfully as words. Holocaust education programs include his drawings, using them to teach about camp conditions, about resistance, about the power of individual action against systematic evil. The question Taslitzky asked himself in 1940 when he first picked up that charcoal stub remains relevant. What can one person do against massive evil? His answer was simple. Draw. Document. Testify. Bear witness. Refuse to let crimes happen in darkness. Force acknowledgement. Create evidence that survives to indict perpetrators and honor victims. It wasn't enough to stop the Holocaust. One man with charcoal couldn't prevent genocide. But it was something. It created a record that prevents denial. It honored the dead by preserving their faces, their stories, their humanity. It ensured that future generations would know what happened, would see the faces of victims, would understand the cost of hatred left unchecked. Boris Taslitzky's drawings hang in museums today, silent witnesses to the worst humanity can do and the best humanity can be. They testify to systematic murder and individual courage. They document industrial death and artistic resistance. They prove that even in hell, even facing death, even when hope seems absurd, human beings can choose to bear witness, to create testimony, to preserve truth against lies. The charcoal marks on paper remain, faded but legible, imperfect but powerful, humble materials transformed into eternal testimony. They speak for the dead. They challenge the living. They demand remembrance. And they prove that one person, armed only with scraps of paper and stolen charcoal, can fight darkness with light, can resist erasure with memory, can defeat forgetting with art that endures long after empires crumble and evil systems collapse into the dust they always deserved.